first official qualifying session, and once again Ayrton Senna, the man on the pace, provisionally setting his 46th pole position. Hello and welcome to a rather damp Montreal for day 2 of Eurosport's coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix. Coming up in the next half an hour, we meet the man behind the team which won here last year, Frank Williams, and we take a look at the fascinating role of telemetry in the modern Formula One motor racing car. Plus, the final battle for pole position, the second official qualifying session. With me once again, John Watson. John, what did you reckon to the first day's action?
Very predictable. Ayrton Senna on pole position, McLaren's first and second, and of course Saturday now it's had a very, very wet morning, and there's no prospect in my mind of the track drying out enough to allow anybody else to improve. And of course the 4 people who are on the bubble, those that haven't qualified, Roberto Moreno, Gugelmin, Barilla, and finally David Brabham, they're not going to make the race.
Encouraging signs, though, on the first session from Team Benetton.
Benetton have got a lot of improvements in the car. John Barnard is here, he's the engineer in the team. He doesn't come to all the races, but as well as that, Ford are working very hard indeed with a new HB engine, and come Paul Ricard in 2 races' time, they're looking to be able to outpower the V10 and V12 engines, so that's something to look forward to in France.
Well, lots more from John Watson later on. Meanwhile, Montreal, a happy hunting ground for the Williams team. They won here last year, of course, with Thierry Boutsen. Andrew Marriott has been speaking to the man behind the team, Frank Williams.
Well, Frank, you've had a little time for reflection after that superb win at Imola, and there still are people who don't reckon that Riccardo Patrese is a top-line driver. Your comment?
Well, I think people who want to comment on motor racing should first of all look at the results, because as they say, it usually speaks for themselves. I mean, winning at Imola was a bit of a swallow, the first swallow to arrive. We hope there are some more. But talking about Riccardo and Terry, I mean, we have an extremely well-balanced team of drivers. They get on very well, which is nice in the year 1990, maybe a bit unusual. And at the present time, we don't think we can do better. They are both potential winners, providing the team gives them winning cars. And the evidence for that, Andrew, is in the past, Alan Jones turned up, underrated, he got a winning car and he won. The same with Keke and the same with Nigel.
So really you still consider yourself something of a star maker in a way. You always were, of course, in your earlier days. So you look for the talent that other people haven't spotted.
That is definitely not the case. In the case of the 3 drivers we've mentioned, what occurred was it was the best driver we could obtain for the money we had available, etc., all the other parameters which you use for choosing a driver, and it worked out brilliantly for Williams, and I hope the same for the drivers concerned. The only comment I would make that one other driver from Northern Ireland was made a superb offer and declined it, much to our regret, just maybe to his regret.
Of course, at the end of the day, I suppose the biggest consideration of all is money. You don't have an open-ended budget, as perhaps Ferrari does. Would, if you had an open-ended budget, you choose a different lineup?
The answer to that is that regardless of budget, we have a more than adequate amount of money for whatever we need in Formula One. We would first of all decide not what we could afford, but who we thought at that time for the following season was the best driver, or pair of drivers taking into mind a World Championship, because we're here to winning World Championships, not this Grand Prix.
A lot of speculation towards the end of last year that Alan Prost was going to join you. Renault, of course, would have liked it. Was that ever a reality?
As we're talking today, I would think every one of the 30 drivers here is currently in discussions with all the other 12 or 15 teams here, and we all take part in that little picnic. Drivers do, team managers do. It's an ongoing situation. That's my answer.
No, but what I was asking you is about last year, something that's happened in retrospect. I mean, were you talking to Prost?
We talked to a lot of drivers.
If you reflect back, are there any drivers that have raced for Williams that you'd consider favourites?
Well, I'm smiling because Alan, I guess, is the favourite, maybe because he was a similar age to us when we all worked together. But he was very funny. And he was also, when he stepped down, in my opinion, resolute opinion, the very best. Prost was attacking him for the crown, but Alan retired much too early, I think, and when he stopped, he was still right on top. He just didn't realise it. He didn't take himself very seriously.
To switch now, Frank, to your relationship with Renault, it really seems to have blossomed, and a lot of people really didn't think it was going to work, did they?
If you're referring to the fact that 10 years ago the British teams and the French and Italians took opposite sides of an argument, then I would just say, Andrew, that it was only 6 months ago the Berlin Wall came down. I mean, everything in life changes dramatically in any period of time or history. And I would like to substantiate the fact that working with Renault was very constructive, and I think is going to be very rewarding as a long-term partnership, no doubt about it.
Well, of course, one of Frank Williams' most successful drivers, Keke Rosberg, a face still often seen around the paddock. Andrew Marriott caught up with him to ask him exactly what his role is nowadays in the world of Formula One.
What would you describe as normal work for Keke Rosberg?
A good friend of mine asked last week, said, what's your normal day like? I said, there isn't one, you know. Normal work is marketing, consulting, management of young drivers, and basically everything around motorsport still.
Of course, you're still keeping a very active interest indeed in Finnish drivers, particularly JJ Leto, but presumably he's not very happy at the Onyx team.
Well, I wouldn't say he's unhappy with the team. Things aren't as they should be, you know, and I'm happy that at least he got another 50-lap experience today, and hope that he will make his way in Formula One.
Of course, back in Britain, two Finns totally dominating the British Formula 3 Championship, Häkkinen and Salo. Have you got an interest in those as well?
Well, not an interest, but I do manage Häkkinen and try to help him in all possible ways to develop his career. And I think both Häkkinen and Salo are very special. It's probably their greatest unluck that there are two of those guys. Otherwise, one guy would have been winning already everything, whoever it was, and would probably look like a superstar already now. And it's difficult for people to believe that there will be two superstars, both coming from Finland, you know. But I think they're very, very potential future drivers.
Keke, you are retired. Rumours last year you might come back, and then you made that guest appearance at Spa in the 24-hour race. What was that all about?
Oh, it's just a way of driving race cars, enjoying myself after a long break. And I'll just wait for the rumours to start this year again, you know. They never give up.
You're going to stir those rumours up?
No, definitely not. But I'd like to go and try a modern Formula One car. I mean, try an Ego, not just to play with it, to see how the cars are, and obviously to see if I can still do it, because it's always interesting to see, do you forget it or don't you?
People did suggest that you possibly retired a little early. I'm one of the most exciting drivers out there on the circuit. You seem to be in your prime and you just gave it all up.
No, I didn't give it up. It was a time schedule decision. I decided in the 86, 22 years of every weekend racing, it has to be stopped one day. And it's very difficult to say, do you stop too early or do you stop too late? You know, I mean, a good friend of mine once said, how long is a piece of string? You know, it's a very good description. How long should you keep on driving?
Well, Keke Rosberg's most successful years obviously spent with Williams, and we stay with Williams for the time being for our technical file this week, which centres on the fascinating world of Formula One telemetry. We've been speaking to Bernard Dudot, Renault's technical director of sport.
It's a fantastic tool for an engineer to work about the engine, for the mapping, for the tuning of the engine. And really the main progress we made this last year, it's about the telemetry. We have a picture, and this picture is all the parameters of the engine. It is like a radioscopy, if you like, of the engine, and we know everything about temperature, pressure, RPM, and we can follow each parameter, the principal parameter of the engine, each lap. For the driver, it is a very exciting, interesting thing, because now the driver can concentrate only, this is mean to drive, on time, balance of the car, but nothing, a very small thing about the engine.
Welcome back. Well, as you can see, the bad weather looks set to stay, at least for today, which means that yesterday's practice times will in fact form the grid. A familiar name in pole position. For the rest of the details, let's straight away join your commentators, John Watson and Andrew Marriott.
Well, the final hour of qualifying has just commenced. The track is still wet, as you see. And one of the first people to venture out, Sandra Nannini in the Benetton Ford. That team looking very impressive here in Montreal. John Watson, we have this damp track. We have an hour in front of us. Any chance at all of it drying out?
The chances, I think, are not terribly great, but we have seen parts of the circuit, a dry line appearing, and that's even without any cars running. But if Nannini is on wet tyres, he's just having a look around the circuit, probably judging how much time it will take for the circuit to dry out enough to go on to slick tyres and maybe have some hope of improving on his 4th place on the grid.
Of course, a very frustrating time indeed for the 4 people who have failed to qualify so far. That is a problem for them, particularly David Brabham, who was beset with gearbox problems in yesterday's qualifying, and he did a very few laps. The 4 who have currently not made it: Moreno, Gugelmin, Barilla and David Brabham. There is Senna, currently on a 1 minute 41.207, 21 seconds slower than he was yesterday. Gives you an idea of the conditions. Senna not the fastest in this session so far. Nelson Piquet popped out, did a 1 minute 40.113, so he currently heads the pile, but it really means nothing. Here is Senna. And you can see the bumpy nature of this circuit here in Montreal. The car bucking around. As he comes past the pits, a plume of spray. There's Neil Oatley, the designer of the car. Ginger-headed gentleman with Ron Dennis behind him. Shower of sparks from Nigel Mansell. This morning, in the practice session, on a much wetter track than this, John, Mansell was extremely impressive, particularly through the fast chicane just before the pits. Mansell, the fastest man in that morning session. And I have to say, I was absolutely transfixed seeing him come through that chicane. Other drivers were braking for it. Nigel was just lifting off the throttle, then flooring it.
Well, really, Mansell's had such an awful season so far in 1990, and he really wants to first get a finish, but also get a finish near the front. And if the conditions tomorrow are wet, then of course it puts him in a very strong position. Being able to go through that corner, that right and left flick, and it is extremely quick, even in the wet. To go through it quicker than your competitors obviously implies the car is working very well in the wet, and of course in the dry it is pretty impressive as well.
Prost, meanwhile, fastest in the session so far, 1 minute 39.844. And now Piquet has gone quicker, a 1:38.597 from Nelson Piquet from Rio de Janeiro.
Really, when you've got practice conditions like these, every lap you're going to see a change in position because the circuit is drying, and no sooner have you done your best lap than the next lap will be that bit quicker. Alain Prost now around the back of the circuit, searching out that dry line, and you can see the circuit really is beginning to show serious signs of drying out enough that eventually somebody's going to be brave enough and venture out on the slick tires. But this part of the circuit here, you can still see it's still very damp there, and the worry about these conditions is that while maybe 80% of the circuit could be dry, there's parts where you get it sufficiently wet, and the balance now will be really in the hands of the teams. They will be watching the lap times, and they will then decide at what point it is advantageous to change tires from the wets to the dries. So they'll quickly have Prost in and fit a set of slicks to his Ferrari.
And still heavy grey clouds above us. Just look up there as a helicopter goes past. And we could still have more rain, there's no question about that. But as you say, John, at the moment the circuit is drying. Whether it dries sufficiently in the remaining 40 minutes for any of the drivers to improve on Friday's times remains to be seen.
What we need is really a lot more cars running to encourage the track to dry out, and because the racing line is relatively narrow in terms of the width of the racetrack, if you had all 30 cars out at one time, it would probably assist the drying process in half the time we're seeing right now. But of course, not everybody wants to be out, and the people that are in 24th, 5th and 6th place, they'll be hoping that the rain comes back on. They don't want to have to go out and defend those bottom positions. Ayrton Senna now has finished his initial run, being pushed back into the pits. I suspect that he'll sit there now. Now we're looking at Gerhard Berger, also on wet tyres, having a couple of exploratory laps.
Yes, it's the first time Gerhard's been out in this session. And here he comes, chased by Roberto Moreno. Roberto, fastest of the pre-qualifiers on Friday morning. And the man that's actually on the bubble at the moment, 27th fastest.
Quite often happens, Andrew, that those cars, the cars that are not the most competitive, actually work very well in these conditions, and it's always an indication of the car setup as to how quick they are, whether the slower cars often work well in these funny conditions. It's an indication that the car maybe is not as well balanced and set up in the dry conditions. But Gerhard Berger, we're watching now, coming down to the hairpin bend, probably down into first gear in these very slippery conditions, just creeping round at little more than 30 miles an hour. Very judicious with the throttle, picking it up as progressively, taking second, third and fourth gears, not going to the maximum 13,500 RPM of the Honda engine, to try and contain the wheel spin that he would get if he allowed the engine to run to its maximum RPM. Down into this right and left chicane just before the start-finish line, and it's very spectacular. Even in these conditions, the cars are going through there certainly at 130 miles an hour.
Well, they're sitting it out in the Williams pit. There you see the back of Thierry Boutsen, Riccardo Patrese, and of course design director Patrick Head. They haven't been out yet. They don't look very interested in it. Remember, of course, that Thierry won the race here last year in the rain. People have suggested he's a rain master, but he denies it.
It does rain a lot in Belgium, where Thierry Boutsen comes from, but his two races in the rain were outstanding drives, and I think it's modesty on his part saying that he's not a rainmeister. In fact, his fellow former Belgian Grand Prix, Jack Yeeks, was also a bit of a specialist in the rain. I don't know if Jack Yeeks ever denied that fact, but maybe Thierry's modesty is preventing him from accepting that I think worthwhile plaudit.
Well, the cameras pick up Gerhard Berger, and Gerhard is fastest in this practice session. His time has come down to 1 minute 35.518. A couple of seconds faster than anyone else, but something like 17 seconds slower than yesterday's times. Shower sparks at the back of the car, and a lovely shot that is, it just crests the rise.
The Ferraris have been very sparky all weekend. They seem to be running the cars much lower than previously I remember, because coming past this part of the circuit here yesterday, all you could see of a Ferrari was this enormous fireworks display behind the car, and even there we just saw a glimpse of a few of the sparks coming out from behind the car. At one stage, in fact, there was tried to be a ban imposed by FISA that any car that sparked would be disqualified. That fortunately seems to have been forgotten about. I think it was one of those regulations that would be totally impossible to police. Sometimes the organising body in motor racing comes up with some harebrained ideas about what they think should or should not be the case, but cars still spark.
Here's a man who's trying pretty hard, Martin Donnelly, a rookie driver in the Lotus Lamborghini. Martin, very impressive in the wet at Phoenix. As you said, John, that Lamborghini engine, very smooth.
Oh, and he's just
Martin has a big, yeah.
He just got too much right leg. Car broke away. He wasn't able to control it, and of course he slid into the infield onto the grass, and he just done a 1 minute 36.860, and he was looking to improve that lap, but he'd have to go all the way back to start and have another crack at it. Here we are looking at it in replay. Came round the corner finally, but then just suddenly the back end just snapped out. He must have been just, I think, changing from first to second gear and put too much throttle in too soon in the car. I mean, that was a very late spin. It was almost in a straight line when he lost control.
Well, Martin underway again.
Underway into the pits this time. He's come in tell the pits about it. And there you are, looking at a wet weather tyre. That's the product from the Pirelli company. They've got a very unusual pattern. It's 2 different patterns on the same tread, so it works in dry weather or less wet weather and also deep water. The picture looking at Maurizio Gugelmin. He's got a set of tyres on. Now those aren't slicks, those are the tyre covers over his tyres, but I suspect underneath them will be a set of slicks. And Gugelmin, of course, in 28th spot, is hoping and praying that he gets a chance to go out and try to get into the top 26. Oh, and it's Olivier Griard has managed to dig his Osella deep into the kitty litter at the back of the circuit, and he's going nowhere. There are many minutes of practice. He can thump away furiously on the steering wheel.
Griard in the gravel. Well, we go in car with Riccardo Patrese. Finished second in this race last year, so easily could have won it, but had a problem with the underside of the bodywork, which came loose.
Well, he's coming into the pits too. He's just been overtaken by another car. But you can see there the difference in the track surface, the dry line, and the line that's the part of the track that's off the line, which is still very wet and greasy. Coming down now to this very fast right and left S's. It's even in the wet, you can see patches. You get patches of wet right in the middle of that corner. The point of the corner of the car is most heavily loaded. You've got a strip of wet track, and that's not much fun. Well, he's decided not to go into the pits, and he's proved me wrong. He's now continuing on a lap, and at least he's got a clear road ahead of him. As Boutsen appears to have come to a stop, he may have also had a spin. Back to Patrese. It's a very tight and slow section of circuit just after the pits, and he's going rather slowly. Maybe he thought he should have got into the pits the first time. Picking up speed again.
Just look at that front wheel, John. A lot of lean on that. They call it camber. Why have they done that for this wet session?
Well, they're doing it even for the dry session. The idea is to try and to reduce the amount of contact area the tyre has with the surface, and therefore introduce heat into the tyre. And once the heat comes into the tyre, then the compound rubber of the tyre begins to work, and then the heat transfers across the whole of the tyre. It's a means of generating heat in the tyre. It also helps the general handling of the car. It helps the driver turn into these low-speed corners, and of course they're slippery. The track surface here doesn't help very much, so it's an artificial way of trying to improve the handling of the car, and in turn, of course, it puts heat into the tyre. Nigel Mansell whistling through that very, very quick S's before the pits. I think this is one of the most beautiful cars on the racetrack. It's a very distinctively styled car. It's again very much an influence of John Barnard when he was there for 2 years. Mansell tipped the curb on the inside there, ran wide, and wasn't the best line he's taken to that corner in the weekend.
Nigel's previous lap, 1:36.293. So the track still something like 15 seconds slow. Just 12 minutes of this session remaining.
And I think as you're watching Nigel Mansell, he is actually running on dry weather tyres. That may have been the cause of him running a little bit wide in that corner at the bottom of the circuit where it is very slippery. Should it be on dry weather tyres, let's hope we will see an improvement in lap times, as the benefit of grip from the slick tyre begins to show an advantage over that of the grooved wet weather tyres. The Nini letting him slide through, but of course he's had to go offline. He's gone onto the damp part of the circuit. He's had to slow right down to pick up the grip again, slithering out of that hairpin bend, and now picking up speed, coming down to the horrendous fast S's.
Nini, I think, also on slicks. They go past the yachting or the rowing basin.
Well, right now the difference in times between the wet and the dry tyre seems to be fairly even, though that lap Mansell did lose time getting past Nannini, and also the little mistake he made in that corner 1 lap ago. But I think this lap we're going to see the time coming down into the 1:30 bracket, and that'll be a pretty clear indication to all those other people in the pits that now the benefit of wet weather tyres is over, get your men out on slicks and give them some experience on these partially wet conditions. Oh, Mansell again losing a little bit of grip in the corner there. You saw the back end of the car step out, and he had to fight to retain control. Really, it's the experience of a driver like Mansell in these conditions that really you do see why he is so highly regarded, highly paid, and driving in a top team. Fighting for grip as he comes out of that left-hand S's, just getting his rear wheels on those white paint lines, and those lines, of course, don't provide very much grip either. There's a better line through the corner that time, able to get the power on, keep the car pointing in a straight line, no unnecessary wheel spin or tail slides. I mean, a 120, this is a much quicker lap than the previous one. But is it going to be quick enough to get him into the 130 bracket? Well, it's a 133.4, and that's really no quicker than the quickest on wets, but it's an indication with the circuit beginning to dry that there is the chance for one or two people to consider going out. And we keep mentioning those four people: Moreno, Gugelmin, Barilla and David Brabham, who are so far not in the race. In reality, I think their prospects are running out. They've got about 10 minutes left. So for them to go out and get into the top 26, the starters for this race, the clock's ticking away and time's running out for them.
The closing seconds of final qualifying here at Montreal. Nigel Mansell, the first man out on slick tyres, and is the fastest so far, but still a lot of damp patches around. No one is going to improve at all. Mansell has just done a 1:29.489, about 8 seconds slower as he slides around the hairpin. So it will be Ayrton Senna on the pole in his 99th Grand Prix, claiming his 46th pole position. Senna on the pole alongside Gerhard Berger. On the second row of the grid, it will be Prost and Nannini. On row 3, Piquet and Boutsen. And then the man you see now, Mansell alongside Jean Alesi, completing the top 10, Riccardo Patrese and Stefano Modena. Again, Friday's times establishing the rest of the grid. Two Lotuses of Derek Warwick and Martin Donnelly fill row 6. Then it's Nakajima and Alboreto, Griard and Martini, Alio and Suzuki, Pirro and Larini, Gregor Foyte and JJ Leto, Eric Bernard, Ivan Capelli, Andrea De Cedris and Alex Caffey on the back row of the grid. Haven't made it and no chance to improve today: Moreno, Gugelmin, Barilla and David Brabham. So from me, Andrew Marriott, and from John Watson, it's goodbye from a still damp Montreal.
Well, that's it for day 2 of our coverage of the Canadian Grand Prix. Don't forget to join us for the race itself, the whole event live from flag to flag here on Eurosport. See you then.